And we're live.
All right. That's wonderful.
Okay, do you want to go first with opening statements?
You can go first.
Oh, I'm I'm hearing my audio.
Oh,
Hold on a
not on
second.
my end. I
Okay.
got AirPods in. Yeah.
Okay. I had my YouTube open. Okay. There we go. All right. Did you say you want to go first?
Oh, no, you can go first.
Okay. All right. So I think that in order to have consent of the governed, you have to have the right to withdraw consent. And so I think that every individual should have the right to withdraw consent from their governing institution. And that ability, that right, would also go up to the right of the city to secede from the county, the right of the county to secede from the state, and the right of the state to secede from the nation. And so I think it's a fundamental right that we have to have in any system of moral government so that it's like a check on abuse of power, so that if a governing institution starts abusing the rights of their people, the only real pushback that they can have, because just vote harder doesn't actually work, is to withdraw consent, stop paying taxes, and stop following the laws. And so obviously that would mean that every state should have the right to secede from the federal government. And I think that in our present day, that our states not only have the right to, they have the obligation to secede from the union, because every single one of our rights of the citizens are being violated by the federal government. Every single one in the Constitution is being violated by the federal government, and so it's basically the obligation of the state as a body that protects the rights of the citizens to secede from that federal government that is violating their rights.
So let me just summarize your argument. Your argument is that the right of secession is important for moral governance, and therefore, not only individuals, but also states, also cities, also counties, by extension, should have the right to secede from whatever principality they're in. And justification for this is that the government constantly violates rights. Is this correct?
Yes.
A few things there. Well, so I agree with your basic axiom. Individuals have the right to associate with whomever they please. As an individual right now, I have the right to associate with you or not. I have the right to associate with my neighbor or not. So there's absolutely no problem with that. And if you are able to get property out in the wild lands where there's no one around you for thousands upon thousands of miles or hundreds of miles, then you're also able to associate with who you want there and as well. Even if you live in a subdivision, you can really associate with who you want. That's not a problem. That's a moral right. It's a basic right. Without this right, society itself, forget government, society itself would not exist. But when you go from the individual and you abstract upwards, it's not so clear to me that what you're saying necessarily fits your initial axiom. So, for example, you went from the individual having the right to associate to a city having the right to associate. Now, if a city is a principality composed of individuals, okay, I would see why you would say that. But there is no political mechanism. And this is the problem with your belief in national divorce. There's no political mechanism that allows an entire principality, an entire city, an entire county to leave the bigger principality that would not in some way, shape, or form harm individual rights. The only political mechanism that would allow a city or even a county to go from the state is either the ballot box or some kind of majoritarian consent. But if everyone in that county or that city does not consent to their city or county seceding, but the majority do, you're essentially saying the moral right is focused in the majority, which is not true. Moral rights do not come from majorities, they come from first principles. So, politically, there is no moral way to obtain national divorce unless you get everybody on board, which won't happen practically. So I do philosophy on my channel. And so I like to talk about the theory and what it implies, things like that. But I also like to marry the theory with reality, right? Ayn Rand had this idea of life, both ethics. And what she was trying to say is there are some ethical thought experiments that are so outside their own possibility, they're so alien to reality that they actually don't benefit us in our moral decision making. I think national divorce is actually quite alien to reality in that sense as well. Now, if you can manage to get an entire city together to go ahead and secede from the state, the entire city, that's a different situation. If you're able to actually pull that off and you can do it without actually trouncing the rights of those who want to stay, because no one wants to stay, then maybe that's a very interesting situation. But in human societies, there's significant variation. And you generally won't have that. Most of these national divorce movements these days, they tend to be like small communities, small areas, like of less than a few hundred people, like in Texas, for example, wanting to secede. And it's much easier to have ideological cohesion amongst a small group of people than it is amongst a large group of people. So I think practically it's going to be very hard to fulfill that moral right without, again, attacking the rights of those who actually live in the area. Because when you think about a city, well, there's actually property in a city as well. People live in houses in cities. So if you have 99% of the people in the city wanting to leave, but 1% not, and the city decides to leave, well, this has radical implications for the property of the property owner, radical implications for a lot of things, actually. So, yeah, that's one of the problems I see with this. Now, having said that, you do have the right to secede from your government. If you don't like the government of the United States, you can leave. Go to Japan. Go to Mexico. Jesse Ventura went to Mexico. Went to Baja, California. You can go down there. Go to Canada. No one's keeping you in America.
Okay. So even if the majority voted in a city to secede or not, that's not a perfect solution, but the rights and preferences of the majority would be upheld to leave, and that would be inconvenient for the minority that wanted to stay. But I think the burden of proof should be higher for staying in a governing body that's violating our rights than to leave. I don't think the right of the minority to force their neighbors to stay in a government that violates their rights should trump the rights of the majority to leave.
You're framing this wrong. With respect, you're framing this wrong. First of all, no one's forcing you to stay anywhere. We've established if you want to leave, you can easily leave. What you're talking about is a political secession, and political secession goes beyond the mere right of individuals associating with whom they want to associate. This now involves an entire community that is governed by a political mechanism that requires majority assent. So that is a categorically different subject than, say, you and three neighbors wanting to leave the area you're in and carving out your own land. Well, in some places, you can go ahead and buy your own land in a state that you own, your acres. There are people that buy 70 acres and they live on it and they have a fence around it and no one can go in. Go out to Wyoming. That happens all the time. And they're rarely interfered with unless, of course, the federal government decides to go ahead and mine for some resources, which legally, but not morally. Morally, they can't do that, but legally, unfortunately, they can, unless you buy the resource rights on your property. That's how the legal system works. I don't like it, but that's how it works. In that sense, then the solution would be to do what Clive and Bundy did and fight back against the authority trying to force their will upon him. So we can say that we want to have reforms in the government. We can say that we want to decrease the government's ability to violate rights. That's a separate conversation from saying, let's pick up our ball, let's go to the corner, and let's make our own little plot of land. You don't actually solve the issue doing that. You actually just create something entirely different, and the issue persists. Also, back to the community thing, I don't see how me not wanting my city to secede from a state is forcing someone to do anything. I don't really get that. Also, you phrase it between the rights of the majority, the rights of the minority. I'm sorry, but rights are not numerical properties. Rights are integral to every individual. So I reject the framing that we have to consider majority rights versus minority rights. No, we have to consider individual rights because my rights do not succeed or fail on the basis of a numerical proposition. My rights succeed or fail on the basis of their axiomatic truth, and that's it. And political structure is meant to protect that axiomatic truth at every cost.
So the right to leave, you should be able to have the right to leave your government without geographically moving your area if you own your land. If you own your land, you own it, not the government. And you should be able to secede from the government and still retain ownership of that land. You shouldn't have to move to another geographical area. My ancestors built this country, and then some people changed the rules, disregarded the contract that my ancestors signed, the Constitution, and is violating my rights as spelled out in the Constitution. So I have no obligation to the federal government. They've broken the contract with my ancestors, even if it did apply to me, which it doesn't. I never signed anything. I have no obligation to obey them or to pay them. And so I should be able to say, this is my property. I'm no longer being governed by the United States of America. And ideally, every single one of my neighbors should also have that right. And a compromise solution would be if we got together and voted on whether or not we would secede. But ideally, you're right, it should be an individual case-by-case basis where everyone can decide whether or not they want to be governed by the federal government.
If you don't want to be governed by the government, you can leave the country.
But I shouldn't have to leave the country.
Why not?
Because I did not consent to be governed and I own my land. Does the government own it? Or
Right.
do I?
No, so, okay. This is the problem here. You're conflating an individual right to associate, which is axiomatic and true in the basis of society, with a political right. Political right, politics, definitionally, properly understood, is the process of governance. You want to create your own country inside another country. Okay, you need to have more than just property ownership to create your own country. You need to have an entire constellation of laws, rules, standards, a standing army, all these different kind of things. So what you're asking for, you're ultimately asking to create a foreign territory inside another territory, which is very weird. And that cannot practically work by the definition of a nation. Nations are, if we look at the definition of a nation, nations are land masses within a finite period of space, surrounded by borders that have a single political jurisdiction over it that defines it as a nation. Nation is a political designation. But to have someone else create a country inside your country would actually be a violation of the principle of nationhood, by which no nations can persist. Now
I reject that principle.
You reject the principle of nationhood.
Yes.
Wow. Go on. This is fun. I'm curious. Why do you reject the principle of nationhood?
They have no right to exist. The nation has no right to exist.
Why not?
You have no, unless every single person within your nation consents.
Really? That's how.
Yes.
So. Okay. No. No. That's not true. The nation derives its legitimacy. It's true from the people, but the nation also derives its legitimacy from its ability to adhere to first principles, and in its ability to create legal systems that can filter out the passions of those that would seek to violate those first principles. Do you see? Nations derive their legitimacy from numerous sources. Now, it's true. If government becomes injurious to the rights of the people, you can alter or abolish. That's what the Constitution says. But that's not going to be you creating your own country inside of Georgia or Tennessee. That's going to be you starting a movement to overthrow the government, whether that be peacefully through constitutional convention or that be violently, which I don't recommend, by the way, and then reinstituting a different government. That's what the founders did. So again,
Why?
the principle of association is fine, but the idea the nation has no right to exist is ridiculous. And it's an idea that unfortunately the globalists hold too. The globalists think that the nation is actually a chimera, it's an illusion. And so if the nation is an illusion, then political authority can be granted to any force outside the nation, which is
No,
injurious to its existence.
no. I
No,
don't want a higher authority. I want lower authority.
be your own lower authority. I mean,
Yes.
so we're playing in the realm of ideas right now. So
Mhm.
we can go as far and wide as you want to.
Mhm.
Problem is, this debate's not very concrete. We're playing in the realm of ideas right now. You want lower authority? Okay, look, there are ways within the political system that I think we can use to reform some of the government's violations of rights. In my opinion, if we went back to a pre-1980s apprehension of property rights, or even a pre-1900s, by the way, 1900, late 1890s, 1900s, when the progressive era set in, and when a lot of different laws were, especially concerning conservation of land and national parks, and when all that stuff was established, which then allowed the administrative state to creep into the private land ownership and unjustly do things to farmers and to people. And we see in the present day, the progressive era is the antecedent to that. So I would most certainly agree with you that we should roll back some things so that private property rights are actually held to be paramount. Private property rights are both a moral right and also a legal right. Property is not just a moral right, it's first a moral right, but also it's a legal designation as well. It implies rightful ownership, and it's the function of law to secure that. So again, you create this nation of yours in the middle of the country. You've destroyed the mechanism that may not always secure it, but is required. Well, is intended rather to secure it. Now, you may
Secure
think that the
what?
mechanism, your property.
Okay, so the government is violating my right of property every year when they charge me property
Property
taxes.
taxes?
Right.
Okay.
So the institution by nature violates my right to property. So it doesn't fit to exist.
I don't agree that if a nation runs athwart of its original principles, it's not fit to exist. It's like
Then
saying,
what's the point of
no,
it?
no, because you're asking for perfection.
Yes.
It's like saying,
moral perfection.
okay, moral perfection doesn't exist.
It will.
No, it won't.
And it must. And it should.
Really?
Yes.
So you think that if you go out and make your country,
Mhm.
that no one's going to go try to take your stuff, build stuff around your stuff.
People may try. They would be in the wrong to do so, and I have the right to
Yes, I
defend
agree.
myself.
Yes, but the problem is you're expecting everyone to be morally perfect, which is not realistic, and it's not. Okay,
I
then what do you
don't. I don't expect it. I want to strive for it.
Okay, well, we agree on that. I want to strive for moral perfection in my government and also in myself as well. We totally
Mhm.
agree with that. I want to
Mhm.
strive for objective moral perfection.
Mhm.
But I definitely don't think that the most viable means of getting there is by getting rid of the government.
But they are our biggest violator of our rights. Why should we keep
They're
the
one
federal
of the
government
biggest
around?
violators.
Who?
Well, I think for many reasons. Number one, so again, yes, the federal government has grown to be a big violator of rights. That's true. I believe in reforming it. I don't believe in getting rid of it entirely. I believe in reforming it. I believe in downsizing 80% of it, most certainly. But I don't believe in getting rid of it.
Why?
If government, why? Because it's a viable mechanism to secure rights.
How? But they don't
From larger
actually.
from larger scale, yes, they do. They fund a military. Now, our military does a lot of things I don't agree with, but a military fundamentally, a standing army protects the nation. I mean, you can't just make these generalizations. Well, they don't actually do this. Yes, I can give you thousands of instances where government does defend rights, even if there are more where they violate rights. Actually, I'll give you some where they violate rights. Eminent domain. That's a violation of your property rights. The fact that they can just come in, claim legal right, and take your property away, that's wrong, right? NSA spying on you. That's a violation of your right to privacy, which is in the Fifth Amendment, I think.
Yes.
Wrong.
Mhm.
The fact that the fact that they can arrest you for a nonviolent crime, taking a drug, That's wrong. A
I
bunch
would
of
say
things
that
are wrong. But
any one
you go on.
I would say that any one of these rights violations would justify seceding from that government
No.
and instituting a new institution that is by unanimous voluntary consent to perform the role that we want government to perform.
The moment someone does not consent to the government, even if the government is actually doing its job, is the moment that structure would fail. If we had it your way, governance would be a very weak structure. Basic
Yes.
consent alone, it would be not weak in terms of scope, weak in terms of justification. I want government to be weak in terms of scope. We agree on that, but in terms of justification, if the moral standard was if one person doesn't like the government, they can just revoke their consent and the
Yeah.
government itself must fall, then you
Yes.
would have no kind
Well,
of
the
government.
government doesn't have to
No,
fall. If you like your government, you can keep it. It's just the people who don't want to be involved anymore should be able to leave
you can leave. Put your house on Zillow and you can move.
without selling my property. I should be able to
Okay.
retain my property. And I would also like to point out that even if
Yep.
you leave the country, the United States still demands income tax, and it's a lengthy and expensive process to revoke your citizenship. So the United States, it's not actually that simple to just move to Canada. They still actually demand income tax.
Okay, and go through the process. I mean, you want to leave the country. You don't like the government. You can leave.
Should I be able to retain the property in my land and revoke my consent to be governed, not that I ever gave it, and I should be able to live there peacefully, not paying the government, not obeying their laws, not expecting anything from them, and not have them come with armed police officers and agents and confiscate my land and arrest me.
I would agree with you. I don't want your land to be seized. If you want to stay in an area and you want to not pay property taxes and you want to not abide by their laws, you have the right to do that. But there's going to be consequences to that. You don't want
What
to have,
consequences?
you don't want to have the consequences.
What
Okay, well if you're
consequences?
in just like if you're in a community and you don't abide by their norms, people in the community will want you gone. If you are in no man's an island, if you're in a area and you don't abide by their laws, why should the people in that area be expected to keep you around?
Well, they don't have to associate with me if they don't want to, but do you think they would be justified in using violence to get rid of me?
It depends on what law you're breaking.
I'm not violating anyone's rights. I'm not harming anyone.
Okay.
I'm just minding my own business on my own property.
Then you should be left alone. And you can be left to go out to Wyoming. There are entire areas where the government really does not do much out there. And you can have your own little cabin in the woods.
Well, that's what they tried to do in Ruby Ridge, and that didn't work out well for them.
That was a different situation, though. I mean, you have people. Really. You have people who go out and they buy their own land and they do different things on that land, and that whatever you do might attract, for the Branch Davidians, for example, it might attract scrutiny. And we can talk about if the government's scope should expand to that scrutiny. I don't think it really should, unless there's violence involved. And in the case of the Branch Davidians, there was violence and rape and all kinds of stuff involved. But
that's why I used the example of Ruby Ridge.
Right. But I mean, I think that if you, under the current system, I would agree that it's very difficult to maintain a pure sense of property rights. There are things we can fix. We can get rid of eminent domain. We can get rid of property taxes and just have a single flat income tax for every single person. There are things that we can do within the political system that would address a lot of your concerns, but you want to completely leave while staying inside the country, which again goes against the principle of nationhood, and then exist in a community where you don't want to uphold their laws. This is antisocial.
Yep, it can be. Or my whole community can decide that we want to do things a certain way, or maybe a few families will decide to buy some acreage out in the country and set up our own community, and we decide to do it together. I mean,
yes.
if we have this right to withdraw consent of the governed, it opens up all kinds of possibilities. And it's really
Okay,
the only way to actually have a check on a government
okay, no,
when
it's not.
they are violating rights. That's the
No, it's
only
not.
real way on an individual by individual basis to put a check
No.
on that. Because
So,
obviously the representative democracy has not worked in
okay.
performing that
No,
duty.
so no, secession is not a good way to check government's power. Secession is a great way to make government angry. It's a great way to make government angry.
They're angry because they're losing power.
And yes, they are. But I'm saying practically it's not a good way to check government's power. If you want to check government's power, just abolish the government. I have no problem with revolution, by the way. I mean, you and I probably agree. If a government becomes injurious to the original ends it was intended to, I have no problem with revolution.
I
Whether that
would
be through a
much
constitutional
rather
convention of states, or whether that be, God forbid, I don't want this, through violence.
I would much
I don't mind.
rather not have violence and just
I
be
don't want
able to
violence either.
secede. So if you
You can't.
believe
See,
in a
here's the problem.
constitutional convention,
Go on.
so if you believe in a constitutional convention and a bunch of states got together and decided to leave the union, would you be okay with that?
What'd you say?
So
What idea?
if we got together for a
Yeah.
constitutional convention
hmm
and a bunch of states decided to leave the union, would you be okay with that?
Wouldn't be ideal, but if the states, then okay, then again, this runs into the same problem that we had earlier. Because what's the political mechanism to decide who is going to leave the union? It's the
hmm
majoritarian vote,
hmm
which again doesn't just inconvenience, but violates the rights of those in the minority if they want to keep their property and stay in a specific area. So again, I have problems with that. But if you would theoretically get every single person on board in those states, in those areas, which never happened, to leave the union, fine. That's no problem with me. But that wouldn't
Why,
happen.
why is the burden of proof on a unanimous consent to leave the union rather than the burden of proof being on unanimous consent to stay in the union?
Hold on. How are you using the term burden of proof? Because burden of proof oftentimes is the evidentiary standard used by someone who originally makes a claim. So how are
Right.
you using it though?
In order to prove that there's consent of the governed.
How do you prove there's consent of the government?
Shouldn't the burden of proof be on the government to say, we are going to govern this group of people?
No.
They all
No,
should
no,
have to
no.
consent instead of all of us have to consent in order to not have our rights violated.
No. Okay, again, I think that you're asking a leading question because you assume that okay, there's a few ways
You're
to handle this.
assuming that our current
No,
situation is the way it should be.
No, I'm not, by the way. I'm trying to think through this issue. It's a very morally complicated issue. You know, I know you want to debate and everything, but this is a morally complicated issue. So let me think for a moment, please.
Okay.
So the burden of proof to ensure that one has the consent of the governed is on the governed because the governed are the ones originally giving their consent. So no, the burden of proof is not on the government. It's
I
on the
didn't give
government.
my consent.
Then leave.
Okay.
No, no.
I retain my ownership of my land.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
I know
Okay?
that's not the way it works. I'm saying that's the way it should work.
No, because that violates the principle of nationhood. We're gonna go in circles, I think, at this point.
But
That
didn't
violates.
you agree with me that if I did declare myself seceding from the union, but I wasn't infringing on anyone's rights, that no violence should be done to me?
No, you shouldn't have violence done to you.
Right. So you would agree with my principle.
But you shouldn't be able to make your own country, though. You want to establish a political unit that represents your property. Why can't you just property? Why can't you? Property is both a moral right and also a legal designation. So you need to have a political force to recognize your legal and moral and moral right to property, and you can't have a self-contained unit because the moment you become your own nation, you say, okay, I'm legitimizing myself here.
Yeah.
And that's just that you can't really have a self-contained unit.
Why?
Because you can't. You can't really have a self-contained unit. It's like a proposition affirming a proposition. It's like circular.
So how does the nation have that right when all of the individuals in the nation do not have that right? Where does this right come from?
How does a nation have what right?
To be a nation, to be a country, to be a political unit.
We're going in circles. Okay. There are several different things that will justify, from a moral standpoint, the existence of a nation. The consent of the governed is the most important one. Popular sovereignty is also a very important one. The nation adhering to its attendant functions is also a very important one. I mean, we can go in circles all day, but those three things are the most important. But also, a nation is justified as well by its nature being sovereign. That's actually the distinctive characteristic of a nation.
Why can't an individual
And
be sovereign?
leave the country if you want to be sovereign. I mean,
I'm sovereign. This is my land. This is
good.
my
That's
domain.
great.
I will
Okay.
defend it as an army of one. Are you
Okay,
telling me I
that's your
have
right.
no right to do so? Or, that is my
No,
right, right?
you're strawmanning me. I didn't say that.
I'm asking
You're
you.
trying
Is
to
that my
you're
right?
trying to condense a very complex moral and political question that has a lot of different moving parts and level of both the individual and the society into a few single sentences. This is the
Right.
problem with libertarianism. This is why I don't call myself libertarian anymore. No, this is exactly why. Even though the character of my philosophy is quite libertarian, I don't call myself libertarian anymore because I think libertarians tend to tie themselves up into these absurd thought experiments that are very linear and don't actually consider the multidimensional function of a society.
Oh, I have considered the multidimensional function of a society.
Okay, then you tell me this. How does a community or a nation maintain its sovereignty, which is their right, when you have your own political unit right in the middle of their community or nation?
I'm not infringing on anyone's right to do anything that they want to do.
No, if you were to establish your own country in the middle of a community, it's like establishing your own country in the middle of like an organized community. How that would go against their sense of sovereignty, because now there is another political unit inside their country or community.
I don't believe that that's a right, that there's no right of the majority to infringe on the right of the minority for some
I agree
sort
with you,
of
which is why we shouldn't be
of
sovereignty. Which is why we shouldn't be doing secession. Because again, you will always run into this problem in the real world. You will never be able to use a political mechanism that does not rely on the majoritarian consent to secede in a broader area that will not in some way, shape, or form violate the wishes of some people in that area.
Right, which is why it should be ideally on a case-by-case basis, on an individual citizen by citizen basis.
So you're saying that, okay, imagine you have a single state, let's say the state of Georgia. Imagine every single country became a city-state. Mm-hmm. Every single country became its own country. Mm-hmm. How does that function without tending to chaos?
I don't see why it would turn into chaos. We have
what happened to the Greek city-states?
Can I finish my sentence?
Oh, sure. Sorry. I apologize. I got ahead of myself.
Every other system in society for how we get food and so many things. I mean, I just think of food because it's so important. Like that system cannot go down, right? And the government has some control on it. They do like farm subsidies and stuff. But for the most part, it's pretty hands off. We don't like have a big problem just kind of figuring it out, right? We get things where they need to go in a timely manner. It's a very complicated system. There's lots of different stores. You have Walmart and you have Target and you have every different grocery store, different shipping companies, different farming companies. A lot of farms are just like very small. And somehow we managed to make this system run really, really well. And there's no reason why we can't have a system that works like that, that provides people with protection from violence.
So you want anarchy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm an anarchist.
Okay, that's okay. Because I was trying to figure out. Okay,
But I
Okay, so
don't
this is
really
a
like the word because I'm more
no,
so
no,
like
yeah,
I'm against coercive government. I'm not against government because there's nothing
right,
intrinsically in the
right,
definition of government that
okay,
requires that it be coercive.
mm-hmm,
I'm against coercive government, but as
mm-hmm.
long as there actually is consent of the governed, when you turn 18, you actually sign a contract giving your consent to be governed, to obey the laws and to pay taxes and to whatever is required of you, and you have the right to withdraw that consent, then that is okay with me.
What use is a contract if you have no ability to punish the violator?
You can have ability to punish the violator, but you
Really?
need to be able to withdraw consent and to end the contract. No, like it would not be a valid, fair contract to sign away your entire life with, like, even if the other side is violating the
Oh,
contract and they get to
okay.
decide whether or not they're violating the contract.
Okay, so then you tell me who officiates the contract?
A voluntary court system. We actually already have this for
Who
civil
justify
courts
who
right now.
justify? Sorry, go on. Mhm.
We already have this system for civil courts right now. You can go to the government civil court system, but you can also sign a contract that says that you will go to a private arbitrator if
Mhm.
that needs to be adjudicated. And the Supreme Court said that that's valid. So we
Right,
already have that.
arbitration's not because arbitration is still legitimized by the government, even though it's undertaken by a private individual. It's still legitimized by the government.
It works by a system of you won't go to jail basically if you go to a
Hmm.
private arbitrator
Right.
and you decide yes, you were in the wrong, you owe this person x amount of money, and you say I'm not going to pay, then that goes on your credit report. Nobody comes and arrests you. It's all by a system of voluntary reputation and boycotting system.
An arbitrator is someone who you sign legal right to adjudicate a particular matter. The only reason an arbitrator is able to exist under our current system is because the government is quite literally saying, "Hey, we're going to give this person our power so they can
Mm-mm.
decide this matter." They have the legal power that a magistrate normally would have, but
No,
except it's not the government, it's them.
no,
So who? Yes, yes. Who legitimizes the arbitrator?
because they don't have the power to go confiscate your property.
Okay, you have a one-dimensional view of political legitimacy. If you reduce another reason why I can't stand libertarianism. If you if you were to, and I'm by the way, I'm half joking. I'm actually really enjoying the conversation. I'm half joking. I again, the character of my political philosophy is libertarian. I'm a classical liberal. I become more conservative over the years, so I'm not trying to attack libertarianism. Not, but I think that this is a problem that a lot of libertarians do have. They view politics solely as a game between coercion and voluntary association, when there's actually much more to it than that, that actually increases understanding of the craft of politics. It's true that at the very bottom of political organization, there is a means of coercion, right? Use of force. But that's not all political organization is either. A political organization, along with having that element of coercion, also has an infinitesimal amount of other elements that come from the broader society. You can't really coerce people, for example. You can't really coerce someone to become an FBI agent, but there are people that decide to pursue careers in law enforcement. That's a form of voluntary association that actually informs the structure of the political structure. But if there were just people that said we don't want to be law enforcement agents, well, no amount of force will be able to move people to be able to do that, which is why you actually see cities around the country that are losing law enforcement due to the fact that their city councils and their county commissions have defunded the police. You see them running dry and you see the crimes going up because no matter how many bonuses they put out, no matter how much they try to do to entice people, they don't want to be police officers. So I think that it's very wrong to see political structure solely as a means of coercion, and anarchists and caps especially, they have a tendency to do that. But what I'm trying to say about arbitration is the arbitrator doesn't have the right just because they feel like they have the right. You sign a legal contract that is officiated by the government. So no, we don't have the kind of system that you want. You want a system where people just by themselves, with no outside officiating force, establish this system, this court system, and voluntarily agree to give it legitimacy. The moment someone says, this is not legitimate to me, how do you enforce that without coercion?
So it really depends on what kind of so I break things up into three spheres. You have the protection sphere, which is protection from violence. And this kind of government institution would have the right to use violence to defend the innocent. And this is the same right that every individual has to defend themselves and others. And then the commercial sphere would be everything involving the economy, currency, employee protection, uh, product safety, all of that. There's so many things that go into that. And they would have the right to put people that break their rules on a boycott list. So when you go to use your card with that particular store, it doesn't work because they violated their rules and got put on the list. And then you have the social sphere, and this is where everything else is: education, healthcare, welfare, all kinds of social norms, all of those rules about how society functions. And they back up their punishment basically is just to basically criticize people, shame them, shun them, and it's just basically social repercussions up to ostracizing them or basically kicking them out. And so if somebody is violating someone else's rights by being violently aggressive towards them, then it would be legitimate to take that violent criminal and lock them in prison. But if it's a lower law, then they wouldn't have that right.
You keep saying these institutions would have the right to do things. They'll have the right. Your premise assumes political right in some way, shape, or form. How do you assure political right and its legitimacy without having some form of coercive force,
Because
some
you
sort
don't
of monopoly on coercive force?
you don't need coercive force because every single person that government governs has consented to be governed. So they are just saying, I have this right to self-defense. I'm going to give it to this institution to do it for me. I have the right to boycott. I'm going to give it to this institution. I have the right to freedom of association. I'm going to give it to this institution.
So
And they
yes,
can
the end
withdraw
of
that too.
yes, which would immediately cause the institutions to fall if enough people withdraw them.
Right. Right.
You
And
don't have
so
a
this is the
you
beauty
can't
in
you
it.
can't have a state. No, that's not beautiful. That's scary. You don't have a stable political order if the overarching structure is meant to govern you, meant to defend you against broader threats that you, in your individual capacity, can't personally take on. You don't have a stable political order if those entities don't have a stable ability to do that.
They don't need stability, especially when they are doing a bad job. So the beauty is that you're able to check institutions. If they're doing a bad job, if they are not giving good services, or if they are using violence against peaceful people, if they are violating people's rights, if they're charging too much money, if they're doing any of these things that the governed doesn't like, they can withdraw consent and that government collapses. And that's the beautiful thing. The problem with governments that's different from the private market is that even when they're doing a terrible job and they're corrupted and they're making terrible decisions and not making decisions based upon the best interests of the governed, but off of the politicians getting their kickbacks from special interests, and it keeps on going, keeps on going, it should collapse and we would all be better off.
So I think you're conflating two things. Um, you're conflating our current political situation with how political order would be situated under your anarchist utopia. Let's not do that because that muddies the waters.
What do you
Our
mean?
current political it muddies the waters in that it obscures the key differences between those two things that would then compel us to make different considerations. So how we consider how a political order exists in the anarchist sphere, it's not the same way you consider how it exists currently because we don't live in the anarchist sphere. It'd be a category mistake. So let's take these one by one. Let's do the current political order. It's true. The government is not only ran by special interest, but also the administrative state. I totally agree with you. It's true. And that's not good. And people again When the government becomes injurious to these ends, they can alter or abolish it. Now, abolition most certainly is an option under the Constitution. It's also a moral option as well. Abolition with the intent of course, creating another governing structure. But what's also an option is to alter it. Now, you can easily alter the government to make it so the pressure of special interests are not so big or they're not existent at all. You can alter the government to make it so the administrative state, the bureaucracy, is not actually the fourth branch of government. You can alter the government to actually address every single thing you're mentioning. Your argument is that you shouldn't have to alter the government. You should be able to establish your own government in the middle of the country, which again has so serious complications to it that I don't think are practical to the survival of a nation or a community. That's my primary objection to you wanting to establish a political unit, not yourself being autonomous. If you just want to have your own property and say, you know what, I don't want to pay taxes, I don't want to pay property taxes, I want to have my own community, then that's fine. But also, that community has no obligation, for example, to let you benefit from the police service.
True.
But you also would have a problem with that as well, because you couldn't really establish, too much of it. You couldn't really establish too much of a nation because you have such a small, minor area. So you basically made yourself an island surrounded by an ocean you can't tap into. Now, that's your choice, and you should be able to do that, by the way. But it shouldn't be recognized as a political unit. That's just weird and odd. I don't think so. It's not big enough to be a political unit.
Can you define what a political unit is, and why is there a size requirement?
Well, because a political unit is, it's defined by not only having borders, but also having a certain kind of landmass as well, right? So, for example, I can't make my apartment a political unit because my apartment doesn't have the characteristics of a political unit. Now, someone in the chat mentioned the Amish. The Amish, theoretically, they are big enough and they have big enough communities to be a political unit. Yes, they can. They have stores, shops, their own established culture, all kind of stuff, right? And the Amish have enough land where if they were to do that, it wouldn't really disturb anybody in the community because the Amish live away from people. So they can be a political unit, but then again, that would run into the problem as well of having a nation within the nation, which I don't think is acceptable, personally.
Why?
So, because once again, it threatens the idea of national sovereignty.
Why do we need this idea of national sovereignty? What good does it do?
Okay, what good does national sovereignty do? Okay, I'll do a syllogism for you. All concepts in reality, all concepts in reality need limits. B, the nation is a concept in reality. C, therefore, the nation needs limits. Sovereignty imposes a very strict limit upon both the size of a nation, because it's saying you are sovereign over this particular territory, and over what other people can do to your nation. So if we're going to abide by the syllogism I just posed to you, the nation needs to have a limit, both geographically, physically. Sovereignty is that limit. It does good in differentiation. We learn by differentiation and distinction. If we couldn't differentiate and distinguish things, we wouldn't be able to learn anything, because the nature of knowledge is that knowledge is a very complex phenomenon that requires us to deal with a bunch of different concepts that are unique in their own way. So it fulfills a necessary requirement of all things in existence. So no, national sovereignty is quite important.
I'm not sure I followed. Let me ask you like a hypothetical question. Let's say that United States of America, for no reason, decides to invade Canada. And they just say this is their national sovereignty to do so. And almost everyone in the country was like, no, we don't want to invade Canada. That's BS. Like, absolutely not. Should they be able, and for some reason, like, we can't do a constitutional convention, the states, like, we don't have any mechanism to stop the federal government. They're just like doing this anyway without any regard for the consent of the people. Would you think that we would be justified in saying, No, we're declaring ourselves sovereign, and we're not going to pay for this war, and we're not going to participate in
You're
it.
asking two very big questions there, two very different questions, too. You're saying if the government tried to invade Canada on the basis of national sovereignty, well, that's not what national sovereignty is. That'd actually be a violation of sovereignty.
Well, that's what they
Again,
say it
sovereignty,
is.
no, well, meaning does not flow forth from the whimsical passions of man. Meaning flows forth from the nature of reality.
Mhm.
So government can say anything, but it's a
Mhm.
category error in principle to claim that imperialism is sovereignty. Those are mutually exclusive concepts. So the government couldn't use that concept in all its totality because it wouldn't make any sense. So I don't think national sovereignty is a mechanism to invade countries. In fact, just the opposite. Globalism is a mechanism to invade countries. Globalism is what the government has been using for the past few decades to advance ideas across the Middle East and spill blood across the Middle East and also get money from oil and other special interests in the Middle East. It's globalism,
So
interconnectedness.
how
So,
do we
so
put
the
a check on that?
sovereignty is
How do we
okay.
stop that?
Do you want to talk? Do you want to talk about? Excuse me. Talk about national. You want to talk about national divorce or how we stop imperialist ambitions? Those are two very, very different questions. I'm willing to answer.
I wouldn't think they were too different. They're very connected to me.
I don't think so. They
Why?
can be implicitly, but not necessarily. Well, because a nation going in and invading another nation is not categorically the same thing as people in that nation saying, "I don't want to be in this nation anymore," which would be national divorce. Those are two categorically different things.
Well, the first can be a reason for the second.
Sure, I said incidentally they can be associated, but not
Okay.
necessarily.
Okay.
Because theoretically, the people in the nation could actually want to support the war.
Hmm.
You look at the public polling numbers after 9/11, a majority of people supported war with Afghanistan.
Hmm.
So, I mean, this is another problem with assigning meaning to whims of the majority. The majority gets things wrong all the time.
Right. And the government often propagandizes the people to believe whatever they want them to believe through the media and through the public school system.
Well, the government and a bunch of other institutions engage in propaganda. That's true. Um, but I think that social norms actually have a bigger impact on people's understanding of the society and the world than the government does.
Well, the government does have a big influence on that.
It depends on which sector you're talking about. So the government didn't make social media, yet
Well,
social media has
af-
shaped society.
and after it was invented, they infringed on free speech by giving Twitter lists of people to ban.
Now, hold on. Government definitely intervened in social media, but they didn't create social media. I'm talking
Right.
about social media as a change agent in itself, independent of the government.
I didn't say that they created it, but they
Right.
used their power to influence the media and to
Yes,
therefore
yes.
influence the people to
I
believe
think you're
whatever
missing
they
my
want
point.
us to believe.
You're missing my point. Culturally, social media has been a bigger influencer in shaping people's perceptions than the government has, even though the government has, in some cases, intervened in social media and tried to use it to shape the narrative.
So I don't really see a distinction
I do.
between the government and pre-Elon Twitter because they were working
No,
as a government agent.
no, 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 no. No, 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 no. Well, first of all, Twitter was only working as government agent in regards to specific accounts on specific issues. When you're talking about Real Housewives of Atlanta being debated on Twitter, the government didn't care about that. Twitter is bigger than just politics. People don't realize that, but it's bigger than just politics. What I'm trying to say is this: categorically, social media as a cultural force. Forget the past few months where we've found out about government abuse of it. Social media as a cultural force has been more formative in shaping society than the government itself has, even though the government has used it to shape society in their own ways, in very specific areas, by the way. Social media itself, as a tool of voluntary existence and ingenuity, has been a more powerful force in the culture.
Um, but they only care about specific issues. They don't care about the Real Housewives. They care
Who is
about
they?
the government.
Well,
So
no. You continue to miss my point. Maybe I'm not. I'm probably not explaining it better. Okay, let me try. Okay, let's say we have a pie chart. No, not a pie chart. A Venn diagram, and there's the middle. Then there's two sides. Let's say government is one side. let's say social media is the middle. But let's say social media is the other side. Let's say society is the middle. On that Venn diagram, society is going to intersect more with social media than the government intersects with social media. Yes, the government has done different things, social media, we understand this, but the government didn't create it as a cultural force. Cultural norms and forces emerge organically, and then sometimes the powerful co-opt them. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes, the government doesn't care about the Real Housewives, but guess what? Millions of Americans watch the Real Housewives, and that shapes their perception of social relationships, which incidentally informs their perception of political relationships in some way, shape, or form. Government doesn't care about RuPaul's Drag Race. Millions of Americans, especially a lot of gay men, they don't care about RuPaul's Drag Race. You may think the government's trying to, no, they don't care about that. Millions of Americans, especially gay men, do, and that actually that is the focus of their social life.
I don't think we have any way of knowing how much the government has actually been influencing all of these things. We don't know how much the CIA was involved with the creation of RuPaul's Drag Race. We don't know. I wouldn't be confident in saying that it was purely spontaneous.
Okay, no, we had that evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the burden of proof is on you as the claimant to prove that the CIA was involved in the creation of RuPaul's Drag Race.
I didn't make a claim. I said we don't know.
I could be a CIA operative. We don't know. I could be a CIA operative that was instructed to make a YouTube channel to infiltrate conservative causes and propagandize people towards liking the establishment. I've been accused of being that before. I could be.
I assume everyone is a Chloe.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I could be. I could be a CIA operative, but so anything is possible, but not everything is probable. You see, so how probable is it that the CIA, that RuPaul's Drag Race is a experiment by the CIA? It's not probable at all. Now, without any evidence to the contrary, I can't really tell you, but I highly doubt, I would bet my life on it, that a bunch of drag queens on TV that have been around for decades has nothing to do with the CIA.
I wouldn't be sure about that.
Okay, you got to prove it then.
I don't have to prove it. I mean,
yes,
I can't prove it. I
know you can't prove it. That's why I'm saying. I know.
I can say I wouldn't be confident in that and not have to prove that it's wrong, because
there has to be some reason why you wouldn't be confident in that.
Okay. I feel like this is really off topic. I feel like this is another topic, maybe. I'm not sure why we got so far off into. I get the main point is that it's basically manufactured consent. So even if we do sort of have a consent of the governed, it's not a real consent of the governed, because we only have basically two main choices, the Republican and the Democrat. And there are powers involved that have vested interest in keeping both of our choices basically like a false choice, where they would like either one. And they're not going to allow somebody who is actually like wanting to care about the rights of the citizens to get power. And so we have the illusion of the ability to change the system, but it's just an illusion. It's not real at all.
I don't think it's an illusion. I think that if you think you're going to change the system through voting, yes, that's illusory. But I don't think that voting is the only means to effectuate change in the system. I think that Donald Trump actually kind of showed that. Donald Trump didn't win because he was voted in, although he was voted in. Donald Trump won culturally because he broke the orthodoxy, and people liked that. And there was a massive enough wave of people who went to the ballot box with that idea in mind, and then ushered him into office. And then that caused some cultural changes to happen. Not, of course, not as many as I would have liked. That caused some significant cultural changes to happen. And now way more people are enlightened about the realities of our political situation than they would have been otherwise if he had not won. Now, again, not because of him, because of what he represented as a political candidate. So again, I don't think that this idea of having an illusion of choice encompasses the full range of political dynamics. It's true that voting itself doesn't change very much. I would agree with you 100%. And I've actually, in the past, I have come out in a very stalwart way against voting. I don't think that voting is actually something that anyone should do. Come out.
Now you're definitely a glowy.
No, I've come out in the past about that. Now, I'm a constitutional conservative now, and I believe that in order to preserve the Constitution, we have to vote.
Oh,
So,
okay, good.
now having said that, I don't think that we should vote for just anybody, right?
Hmm.
I don't think that people should just go ahead and vote, because that's the only choice they have. I don't believe that. But I most certainly do believe that in order to preserve the Constitution under the current system, you have to vote. Or else you have there, because the Constitution is a legal document. You have no legal mechanism of doing so if you don't vote. So,
Yeah, people say that you shouldn't vote because it's like coercion to do so, but you're actually your consent. If you don't vote, you're like assumed to be consenting. It's not actually like if you vote, you're consenting. It's actually if you don't vote, you're assumed to be consenting.
yeah.
And so
So,
I vote.
so,
I'm
but,
involved.
okay, that's great. I'm happy. That warms my heart for ANCAP to be involved. That warms my heart. No, I don't think she's an answer of a sympathizer. I don't think that's the case. No, I don't think so. No. Okay, let me say some kind words. Richelle, I think that you are a very smart lady. I think that you have a lot of the right moral foundations. And we probably agree on a lot of different issues. But on this particular issue, I think that your understanding of politics is very linear. I don't think that it takes into account everything that needs to be taken into account when it comes to understanding political dynamics. And I also believe that your understanding of governance and political units and your rejection of national sovereignty make it very difficult to have a conversation about what it would look like to have legitimacy in a political system. So there's a lot of different things here, a lot of conceptual differences that we have. But other than that, I mean, I still think that you're a smart lady. I think that you make good points, and it's right. The consent of the government has been manufactured. On my channel, I constantly talk about the manufactured consent all the time. Talk about how manufacturing consent's a bad thing, and how it infects people, and how it erects a poor standard of epistemology, which is not often talked about by a lot of people. So, no, I get all of it. I get all of it. Having said that, I still fail to see how all of this impugns the existence of a sovereign nation. I fail to see. There are problems. There are defects in every structure, even in the founding generation. America's original constitution allowed for slavery. There are defects in every structure. But America wasn't just unique because, America's not indicted by it allowing slavery in the early era. America is justified by recognizing that slavery actually goes against the fundamental principles that political organization requires, and then attempting to act on that in a substantial way. And they did act on that in a substantial way by abolishing slavery in the nation. So that's why, I mean, that's what I see. That's our approach. You want to get rid of it entirely and make your own voluntary system, which again, I'm very skeptical about that. I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think if you like your government, you should be able to keep it. And you said that that my thinking was reductionist and linear. I would say that's a good thing. It's good to be simplistic, linear, reductionist in your moral thinking, because the more complicated and convoluted you get, the easier it is to be tricked into going along with evil. And so it's like making up these grand schemes about ideas of nationhood and sovereignty. It's trying to complicate something that is actually quite simple, which is you should not do violence to peaceful people. And if we take this simple moral code and we extrapolate it up to the government, then we can see that we can have better governments that serve their function better, because they have to compete for citizens. And
No, so go on.
go on.
Sorry.
I was
Sorry, I
basically
interrupted
done.
you.
No, it's
Oh,
fine.
please go on. Okay. So I get this criticism a lot on my channel. People will oftentimes say, Christian, you make everything so complicated. Christian, your philosophy is not really needed. I reject, first of all, that criticism reminds me of what I used to get told in a pastor of my career when I used to write all the time, and my editors would just come in and cut everything down and just like strip all the life out of it. And so that criticism has a particular emotional point to me, but I don't really get into that. But in general, I reject that wholeheartedly. It's not good. First of all, most of my audience, they can probably test this in the chat. Most of my audience are not academics or philosophers. Most of my audience are blue collar or salt of the earth people who research, read, and understand. A majority of them are that. Most
Mhm.
of them are not people in the ivory tower.
Mhm.
I'm not someone in the ivory tower.
Mhm.
I just graduated college a year or so ago. So I'm not
Well,
someone in the ivory tower.
how old are you?
23.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I did
Yeah.
not realize that I was talking to someone
Yeah.
so much younger than me.
Yeah. So I'm not in the ivory tower.
I'll
So
give you
well,
time in a few years. You'll see.
a lot of people have said that. I doubt that, but okay.
I was
No,
once where you are. When I was your age, I was where you are.
a lot of people have said I don't know what's going to happen. People, I became a conservative when I was 14. People said you'll go
Mhm.
out of it by 19. I became more conservative at 19.
Mhm.
People said you'll go out of it
Well,
by college. I became more
how,
conservative by college.
how are you defining conservative? I was wondering this. You call yourself conservative. I wonder how you define it.
I define conservative as both a social philosophy and a political philosophy that appreciates beauty, truth, and order as reflected by nature and tries to integrate that into political structure. That's basically what a conservative is to me, generally. An American conservative is someone who appreciates all of those foundational things. But okay, hold on. Okay, I'll address that question in a second. It's someone who appreciates all those foundational things, but in the framework of classical liberalism. That's basically what it is. But so Latin A just said, especially if you went to college for free because of your skin color. I have thousands of dollars in student loan debt. I wish I would have gotten a free ride to college. I have well over $50,000 in student loan debt. So please, if you know something or you know someone who can give me a write off, please, I will happily take the welfare. I will go against my principles like Ayn Rand did, and I will happily take the welfare. So Latin A, if you know someone, please let me know. Okay, let me know, brother. I appreciate it. No, I'm just that's obviously an ignorant person that probably doesn't have any brain cells. So let me not even address that. But no. So my back to my content. I discuss things philosophically because that's how our nation came to be. That's how we actually discovered that tyranny is wrong. That's how we actually discovered the moral foundations of a necessary society, even outside the political context. That's how, that's how we actually discovered all of these things. We have, as a culture, we have gotten away from philosophy and we've embraced what you want, the more simplistic viewpoint that introduces us to a whole range of conceptual errors that taint our thinking and also don't really encompass the scope of how we should be thinking. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to be simple. I support being simple, but not simplistic. You probably haven't heard me use many 20-cent words in this video, in this discussion. I don't have to. I can explain to you my ideas talking like a normal person. Having said that, just because my ideas are transmissible in a way that most people can understand does not mean people will understand them. The words moral foundations are actually, that's pretty common. Morality, pretty common. But that doesn't mean people will actually get what you're saying when you describe it. So I don't believe that we should actually run away from complexity. We should run towards complexity, but transmit it in a way that people can, if they choose to, understand issues. So no, I think that the ideas of, but by the way, some of these ideas are not very complex at all. National sovereignty, the idea that the nation has the right to exist and preserve itself, is not complex whatsoever. I
Where did
think
they get that
maybe
right
you're just
from,
not
though?
familiar. We're gonna go in circles again. We're going, and I've kind of explained them, and I'm not trying to be mean or anything, by the way.
Mhm.
I just don't think it's going to benefit the viewers if I keep going in circles and explaining the
Okay.
three major justifications for the nation. So we may disagree on the nation and its ability to be sovereign or whatever. That's okay. It's not a very tenable position to have, because if it was, then anyone would be able to come in and just hijack us and overtake us and all kind of things.
Oh
And
no,
they would
we are
they
an
would have.
armed population. Nobody's doing anything to us
Oh no. Okay. Practically, it
unless
would be difficult.
unless
No.
they
No. No.
convince us
No.
that they have a right to.
No.
No one's
No.
doing
No.
anything to
No,
us.
practically it would be difficult to do that, but morally there would be nothing stopping
Impossible.
them from doing that. That's the thing.
Morally, you can't do that.
Sovereignty is a moral principle.
Right. and the
That's how
individual
I
is sovereign. So you can't infringe
not
on anyone,
the
let
the,
alone a whole nation
the
of
the
people.
individual is not an island, but the
Right,
individual has rights that belong to him.
right.
But a nation is sovereign. This is a basic principle that if you get rid of it, you will introduce globalism into your shores.
No, because
Yes.
globalism comes about when you have like the EU, right? You had all of these sovereign countries that those institutions contracted with the EU and gave up their sovereignty to the EU.
So you
And
agree with me? They have sacrificed sovereignty, which has
mhm,
caused globalism to come to their shores. You agree with me? Good.
yeah, but they were the ones who sacrificed their sovereignty to the globalist organization. I don't want there to be a national organization that has the ability to give up my rights to a globalist organization.
The nation does not have the moral justification to give up its own sovereignty. It's like you don't have the justification to kill yourself if you want to. Your life is an inalienable right. You cannot kill yourself morally. So the nation cannot kill itself by giving up its sovereignty. They cannot commit national suicide. They can't do that morally. Doesn't mean they won't do it, but they can't do it morally. National sovereignty is an indispensable principle for the existence of a nation. It's not complicated. It's not complex. It's very simple. If you don't have a nation that has a right to its borders and a right to secure itself against external enemies, you don't have a nation at all. You will not have a nation for very long at all.
I don't see what the intrinsic good there. I don't see the intrinsic good in a state existing. Why is this an intrinsic
That's a
good?
different conversation, though. I mean, look. We can talk about why anarchism and anarcho-capitalism, why that is better than minarchism or whatever. But I'm trying to talk about the practical situation that we see ourselves in, and the idea of nationhood as it stands currently, and as it has stood for a good majority of human history. I'm not trying to talk about if the nationhood is not legitimate because the state shouldn't exist. Okay, you have a quarrel with the state, not nationhood. The nationhood is just a product thereof. You have a quarrel with the state.
Right.
So, okay, that's a criticism. I mean, I understand. I don't really, you know, I'm not really confident enough, and I'll be honest because I have nothing to lose. I mean, I'm enjoying myself. I got nothing to lose whatsoever. I'm not confident enough right now to debate anarcho-capitalism. I'm just not. I don't know everything. I'm not a master genius, but I know one thing, that I won't talk about issues that I'm not confident I can effectively deliver a coherent position about. Maybe one day we'll come back and have an anarcho-capitalism debate, but as for now, I'm not confident enough to do that. So by default, I see the debate on that issue to you, even though I don't agree with you.
Okay, let me ask you a question. I already asked this, but now I can't recall the answer. States seceding from the union. Do you think they have the right to do it, but they shouldn't? Or do you think they don't have the right to do it?
That's a very complicated question. I don't think the majority has the right to decide the political fates of their entire citizenry.
Okay.
So we saw in the South, before the South seceded, we saw a declaration of causes in each of the states that said, we, the people, which really meant the majority. Obviously, not everyone in the South was down for the Confederate political program,
Right.
but it meant the majority, and said, we, the people, secede for this reason, because the Union recognized the Negro as a human being, not a slave, and all this kind of stuff. There was a bunch of different causes for a bunch of different states, and they actually differed depending on state to state. But it was the majorities of that area imposing their will upon the people in their communities.
Okay.
And there were a lot of Southerners who died because of that, because
Mhm.
they were just thrown into the winds and they didn't want anything to do. There's a lot of Southerners that just died because of that.
Mhm. So if a state managed to get unanimous consent of all of their citizens to secede, would they have the right to secede?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay. So does that violate the right of the nation
But
to
then
sovereignty?
again, that's the problem, because you would have a country within a country, which is not acceptable.
Okay. So it's not, they don't have the right to do it then. Does it matter if it's a
No. No,
Is it Texas,
it,
Texas,
it,
who is a bordering state who has an ocean, or does it matter if it's
well,
Kansas that's in the middle?
yeah. Well, it'd probably be more impractical for Texas, no, for Kansas, excuse me, than it would be for Texas. I don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you right now.
So even if you think that they do have the right, you think they shouldn't in our current situation?
I don't know what I think yet. I'm serious. Look, I have 513 videos on a massive amount of topics dating all the way
Hmm.
back to 3 years. I
Oh
have
yeah, I
talked
was
about a
looking
lot
at
of
your
different.
catalog. I was like,
Yeah,
wow.
I have talked about a lot of different topics over the years.
Hmm.
This is one of them I haven't really touched. I've read it here and there. I've heard the arguments. I'm keeping an open mind because ideally, I don't want secession. By the way, I want us to have a unified political order. But whether I want secession, whether it's preferable, whether it's permissible, which is the fundamental moral distinction, is question here. If it's permissible to have succession, but it's not preferable, then what I want shouldn't matter. But if it's not permissible to have secession, but it's preferable, then it's not what I want; it's what the principle requires. So, as someone who studies philosophy, I think it's not as simple as you make it at all.
Um, there in biology class 101, when I was a freshman in college when I was 18, we were taught that the most simplest explanation is usually the true one. That, for example, back in the day before we had telescopes, we had a very complicated model for how the stars and the planets moved in the sky. And then once we figured out that the sun was the center of the solar system and not the earth, it made the explanation of the cosmos much simpler and easy to understand, much less complicated. And there's this principle in science that the simplest explanation is usually the truest. And I find that that's true for morality as well. Morality should be simple and easy to understand. And yes, I mean, I can sum it up in one sentence, but then I have to define every single one of those terms, explain exactly every single one of our rights, which I have written up. I still have to post on my Substack. But I think that if we get a moral principle, a moral system correct, it will be simple, easy to understand, and very, very intuitive, and it should feel right. And I think that that's the way that we should go in the future. I do believe in a moral arc to history, and I hope that in the long run, we will develop that direction. In the American Revolution, we rejected monarchy and the complete imposing on the people, include like we invented freedom of speech and freedom of religion and these types of things. I think that in the future, after the government naturally collapses on its own, because I think that it is very, very powerful and it would be much too bloody to violently resist. But when it does economically collapse, like the Soviet Union collapsed on its own, that I hope that we have developed a philosophical moral understanding that makes us pause and not create a new coercive government and to instead choose voluntary government.
The simple, well, that's your anarcho-capitalist hope and dream, and I understand. And we all have our own moral visions, hopes, and dreams, and everyone has the right to them. So good for you. I I don't have any comments on that. That's very personal and deep to you, and I would not disrespect that. So good for you. But on the subject of simplistic morality, we should make things accessible, not simplistic. So yes, I want the average person to understand my moral system because I want the average person to abide by my moral system. So I don't want people to take other people's property, hurt other people, steal other people's stuff.
Mhm.
But you can't stop there because people then think that morality is entirely in the name of negative action, which it's not. A
Right. That's
section of
just
morality, no, a section of morality is. But if you have these simple ideas that don't include an overarching justification, then not only can you not defend your moral system, which is going to be a problem from a civilizational level, you also don't actually understand your moral system. You understand a shadow of it. So no,
mhm.
I don't support simplistic at all, and I never will. And I used to get told all the time, Christian, you need to write more simplistic. No, and I won't speak more simplistic either. How I'm speaking right now is how I intend to speak. And for a lot of people, again, there's no big words. I don't use the word, I don't use the word cantankerous or any things like that.
And
But I do.
disestablishmentarianism.
But what's that?
Anti-disestablishmentarianism. It's the
Yeah, I don't
longest
use.
word.
I don't use those words. I don't see the reason to use those words because they don't convey concepts. They convey linguistic tools, right?
Hmm.
I want to convey concepts, but I mean, simplicity has its limits. Try to simplify a biology textbook. Good luck. I wouldn't want a doctor that read from a simplified biology textbook. I want a doctor who had to go through years of training, who had to read dense literature, and who has demonstrated an understanding of all that dense stuff. I don't want one that's like, well, your arm goes here, your heart goes here. No, no, no. You need to have never got the white coat in the first place, sir. They should revoke your license. That's how I think. If I don't want my doctor to be simplified, I don't want my
Hmm.
morality to be simplified. My morality is actually more important than my doctor is.
Hmm. Well, we give those types of explanations to children. Like a children's biology book would be very, very simplistic. And I think the average person does need a simplistic understanding of morality. And then the people who are experts in governing would obviously be like the doctor who knows all of those complicated things and knows how to execute on those things. And I think of morality like a house, and the non aggression principle is the basement. And you need a really good foundation, but you also need to build that house and you need to have that roof. A lot of libertarians, they become libertine and they don't want there to be any rules, even social norms, which I'm totally against. Socially, I'm a conservative. I'm very conservative socially. I just don't want to use the state to enforce that upon other people. But you have to have social norms and you have to have organizations. And a lot of these organizations, like mutual aid societies and things that we used to have in America, we used to be a very robust society with a lot of non-governmental institutions, have been hollowed out by the state. And the state has basically become all consuming. And so right now it's very hard to think about getting rid of the state because we basically don't have any of those things anymore. The churches have been hollowed out. The mutual aid societies basically don't exist anymore. So many things like that. And so I want to get to a place where we have those institutions setting morality that's beyond just don't do violence to each other, because we need those rules. I just don't want them enforced by the state.
So I don't disagree that society has been hollowing out the government intervention. We agree entirely on there, and I don't have much problem with what you said in the latter half of your statement. I have a problem with wanting to spoon feed people simplified ideas. That does not help them. Who maintains a society, the people or the experts?
The experts rule the our thought leaders, even if it's a voluntary situation, like a pastor leads the church, the CEO leads the company, and then the underlings follow those instructions.
You have a very caste system like view of man
Well, I am a
in a
social
social
conservative.
sense.
I believe in hierarchy. I believe that
That's
some people are more
I
capable than others,
yes,
especially in
no,
certain
I agree with you.
areas.
Some people are more capable than others in particular areas, but moral understanding is a universal aspect of humanity. Moral understanding is not require should not require some kind of expertise. Everyone should have a deep appreciation and understanding of morality because that is the
Hmm.
basis of society. Whereas you can justify everyone not having a deep understanding of biology like a doctor would, because not everyone's going to be a doctor, but everyone will use moral tools in their life or not use them at least one time, actually more than that by virtue of their human existence. So I don't think your hierarchical analogy actually works there for that reason. It's probably a category error. So here's what I'm
Well,
trying to say.
like the amount of law that someone knows is going an average person can be very different than a judge or a lawyer.
Right, because Yes, that's true. And I like the doctor, the amount of biology someone knows is going to be very different than the doctor. But moral thinking is not some confined area of knowledge in life that only the expert class tap into. Actually, the
Mhm.
expert class actually prey upon the public's lack of deep understanding of moral thinking and twist it to justify atrocity against them. Look at what happened during the COVID pandemic.
Mhm.
So
Which
it's vitally important for people to have a deep understanding, not simplified,
mhm.
a deep understanding of moral ideas. And I'm very dedicated to that. I don't see this idea that people are just, less than average intelligence and need to have things spoon fed to them. Well, guess what? What if it comes justification? Because just like the masses can be fed simple ideas, they can also be fed simply destructive ideas too. Hitler didn't get to the Third Reich by himself. Hitler took
Mhm.
the entire, like 90% of Germans along with him, and they destroyed
Mhm.
the church. They destroyed a lot of innocent people. Those
Mhm.
people didn't have a deep understanding of the philosophies they followed. Germany was a majority Catholic when Hitler came to power, and
Mhm.
yet those people did not understand Catholicism. They had a simple idea of what Catholicism is. Simplified thinking is the gateway to tyranny. I am so dedicated to this line of thinking. It is the gateway to tyranny, which is my entire channel is based on liberating people from thinking simplified. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have simple principles. No, that's fine. But simplified to such an extent that they're broken down to their barest bones parts and you don't understand the justification for them beyond a sentence, that's a problem. And that's what most people have.
The problem with the Germans is that their simplified understanding was incorrect. If the people have a simple, basic understanding of basic, bare bones moral principles that are correct, it would be much better than having a society of people who have a simplified understanding of an incorrect set of morality. And it would be lovely if we could. I mean, the McGuffey readers are great, right? Like almost all American children used to be educated on these readers that were written by a religious moral philosopher and not only taught reading and writing and spelling and grammar, but also taught moral principles in the passages. And this was really, really good for society. But having an idealistic idea that every single person, half of whom having below average IQ, is going to understand a very complicated moral system is not realistic.
I don't, again, you keep saying my system is complicated. It's not complicated at all. It's not complicated in the slightest. It's just not simplified. I can communicate it with simple language, and I do. I don't believe in hiding things behind obtuse jargon. See what I just did there? I don't believe in hiding things behind obscure jargon, obscure language that no one understands. I don't believe in that. You can't be a public communicator and do that. Having said that, I also don't believe in simplifying ideas that will impact the direction of society, primarily because if someone cannot justify the ideas they hold, they are open to manipulation, and you cannot really justify in a consistent way, in a full way, a simplified idea.
Mhm.
That's just the belief that I hold. Now, you keep mentioning children. Men don't remain children forever. Obviously,
Mhm.
we shouldn't be teaching children the law of physics or the law of quantum mechanics or whatever. Obviously, you wouldn't expect a child in that stage of the development to understand that kind of stuff. And that's why we have children's books, children's
Mhm.
TV shows that are oftentimes very stupid, things like that, because that's what a child understands.
Mhm.
But in no way, shape, and form should we expect all men to remain children forever. Men don't.
Right.
They're supposed to mature. But when you have a society that coddles them and expects them to remain children in their thinking by not actually making them think, by presenting them very not complicated, but um, very intricate concepts, then they do remain children in their thinking. And a lot of people today are actually children in their thinking. So I think we
Mhm.
need to do the opposite of what you're saying and keep things, of course, accessible, but not simplified. And
Um, I think
maybe this
that
is a difference of style, by the way.
everyone
That's
should be
fine.
taught to the limits of their ability. Everyone should be taught as much as they can. And if someone does not have the capability of going beyond an eighth grade education, and that's all you can do. But those who can should keep going, obviously. But the reason why people are miseducated and undereducated right now is because of the public school system, because they want to teach people the government is good, obey the government. And that's basically it. And there's no moral teachings whatsoever beyond just obey.
Well, the public school system doesn't even teach obey the government. It teaches nothing of value. It teaches nothing of value whatsoever, because half the teachers are overworked, depressed, and all kind of stuff. They don't teach the class. They just give their kids busy work that comes from the curriculum. So I mean, and look, I'm very sensitive to critiques of public education. I have advocated for abolishing public education many times, but this idea that public education is unanimously making people loyalists to the government is not true, because that gives public education too much credit. They can barely, Baltimore can't even teach their kids how to do math. Almost 90+% of kids in the Baltimore public school system can't even do math. So I highly doubt their ability to teach kids how to obey the government. Sorry, I don't believe it. So now, having said that, I do believe there is a creep in certain school districts of institutions teaching them like gender theory and things like that, but that's informal more than it's formal. That's informal. That's through association and context and modeling and things that happen on an informal level as opposed to a formal level. Which, like, people go to the school board and say, "Why are you teaching our kids about gay sex or whatever?" Well, it's not the school board doing it. It's the teachers who themselves are radical, implementing it in an informal way, getting books into the library and all that kind of stuff, and then presenting this stuff as normal and great. It's not really the school board, which is why you can complain and fuss and fight the school board as much as you want, but that's not going to fix anything. So no, I think that we shouldn't simplify our moral education. If I believe in simplifying moral education, I wouldn't be doing my YouTube channel. I wouldn't be doing that at all. I would give up, and I would just go. I can make a good living in sales. I sell insurance. I can make a good living in sales. I can just do that. I can make a good living, have a nice family. I mean, 7 years down the line, go and sip, juice on the beach, enjoy myself, and not deal with all the criticism and hate I get constantly for being a YouTuber. But I believe so strongly that our culture needs a revival of the mind that I have made it my mission. And of course, maybe this is a quixotic test. Maybe this is a Don Quixote test. Not test. A quest. Maybe it is. But just like Don Quixote, he said, to dream the impossible dream. This is my quest to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question of wrong, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. That's me. I don't care how impossible my cause is. If I can help at least 20 people and everyone else ignores me, all right, Christian Watson, you did your job. So maybe it's a difference of approach. That's fine. Your style is valid. Obviously, your style will reach a different audience than my style will, but you probably will have more people, which is great. It's wonderful. But I don't denigrate people for their styles. Vosh, the very mean, obese pedophile. Well, okay. Alleged pedophile. Well, okay. Jesus, why did I just say that? Okay. But anyway, Vosh.
In Minecraft.
He has a style. He has a style that people of a certain age like. They're very aggressive, mean. Like, he probably wouldn't have been as nice to you as I'm being, because he's not a nice person. He's a very mean person.
Oh, yeah.
Destiny, Vosh, those people, they don't want to actually do what we're doing and try to build understanding. They want to dominate you and get praise from their followers. So, but that appeals to people. And because it goes to our very primal urges as human beings. We like seeing conflict as human beings. We have some human beings have some really nasty stuff within them. We have a lot of beautiful stuff in us as well, like the reason, intellection. We have some nasty urges inside of us that we have to suppress through our reason. And if you appeal to those urges, you will reach a lot of people on that basis alone. So I get it. I know the way to appeal to the most people is not just simplify things, but also hit their passions.
Yeah.
I just refuse to do that.
I'm not saying that you specifically have to be simplistic, or I'm not saying that you are too complicated in your communication style. I'm saying that when it comes to a theory, whether it's a moral theory or a scientific theory, You should be able to simplify it. Not that you have to, I mean, it depends on who your audience is, obviously, but you should be able to simplify it. And that's actually very difficult. Like to write a children's book. Like I love the Tuttle
Yes.
Twins books. And I could not teach my children these principles as well as Tuttle Twin books can, because the author Connor is very good at simplifying the message.
When you say simplifying, I feel as if the message is being sacrificed. I don't like that. If you simply mean making it accessible, which is what I've been saying for the past, I think, hour or so, I'm fine with accessible. I don't mind accessible. I want to make things accessible to people, but I'm not going to sacrifice. For example, Thomas Sowell is praised for his ability to make economic concepts accessible. Having said that, you get his magnum opus, Basic Economics. It's over 1,000 pages long. He explains all the very difficult concepts with common language, but 1,000-page book, that's not going to be able to just be handed to you in a very simplified way.
Right.
That's so depth and breadth of knowledge is distinct from the transmission of knowledge. So I can transmit an idea to you in a way that's accessible, but I shouldn't do that at the sacrifice of depth and breadth. Otherwise, we get what we have today. We get influencers saying a bunch of incendiary things to rile up their audience and getting clicks. That's what we get today. So let me give you an example before, right? Because I got to go eventually. I have to make my quiche. Quiche.
You're sounding like a robot to me. Is it on my end or chat?
Hold on.
Does he sound okay? I don't know.
You sound like a robot to me.
Oh.
What's going on? Hold on.
I just bought a really long Ethernet cord.
Yeah, it's not me.
Let me check my speed.
It's not me. Can't be me.
All right, go on. You go ahead and speak then if the audience can hear you.
Yeah. Do you guys hear me in the chat? Maybe they do. I don't know. I don't know if they can hear me or not. Maybe they can, but yeah, but no, I have to go eventually. I have to go. This is
Okay.
I gotta go make my quiche and relax and everything. It's okay. Should break up a little. Okay. So it's look, no, it's nice to have these debates. I don't do debates very often because I don't think they're particularly productive. But the thought experiments are always fun. And, I did debate for 2 years in college, as I mentioned in my recent video. And so I have no problem debating people. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really trying to debate in this debate. I didn't really do research or anything. I'm just giving my opinions. Maybe if you want to have a formal debate with a moderator, we can do that as well. Maybe that'll be more productive. I don't know. But in this context, okay, that's fine. But in this context, I don't really, when someone says, "Hey, I want to debate you," I'm like, "Okay, got today, man. I don't care. What do I got to? What I got to lose? You owe me?
Prefer,
you owe me at 23. What about 26? We owe me that? I don't know. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. I don't know. But I like giving myself time to grow because now I have something to think about. I've learned from you, that there are some very important dynamics to this question that I didn't really think about, primarily because I didn't really research it because my focus is elsewhere, right? I'm trying to talk about Pride Month and, cultural Marxism and, the importance of natural law to a just society. And I'm trying to talk about a lot of different issues, but I'm not really interested in the minarchy versus anarchism issue. That doesn't really do much for me. Because
I was looking through your catalog and I was like trying to find something I disagreed with you about.
Yeah, no, hey, look, it's the highest form of flattery for someone to watch my content. It's the highest form of flattery. And I really thank you. I thank you for reaching out to me. I thank you for watching the content. I am flattered. I'm flattered and I'm happy and I am grateful. And It's very nice. It's very, very nice of you. So I have no complaints
Thanks for
there. But
thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
no, no. Well, look, I here's my rule that I have. I'll talk to any person, no matter who they are, how big their channel is, or how small their channel is, or whatever. If they engage me in good faith, I'll talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem. I've gone on entire debate panels before, full of leftists, hippy dippy
Mm-hmm.
show. Some people in the chat will know, will remember,
Mm-hmm.
where I dealt with people who are incredibly, incredibly, incredibly bad faith,
Mm-hmm.
who insulted me and attacked me and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I've dealt with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
I
want
deal
to
with people.
have a reputation for being good faith, so that I
Yeah,
get people to come on my show. Because one
I
of
deal
my
with
goals
folks. Yeah.
is to get people who very much disagree with me to come on and not feel like they're being attacked.
No, yeah, I deal with folks in my own audience. One of them's in the chat probably right now, who exist to criticize me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they do. They exist just to criticize and criticize and criticize and criticize and attack. In fact, my own audience probably argues with me more than anyone else does.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, I don't mind. At least they're engaged. But
Mm-hmm.
you see some of these bigger influencers like John Doyle or whatever, people are just like, oh my gosh, I love you. Oh, no, not me. Oh, no, I say one thing. So, and it's fine. I don't mind because I'm trying to build a pensive community. And to be pensive means to approach a matter with deep thought. So, hey, I am happy people think critically. I don't want sycophants following me. I don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not fun. That doesn't cause a revolution of the mind. That simply empowers me. What?
I do a little bit.
Oh, really?
There's a little part of it that's like, yeah.
Well, look, I think everyone needs at least one person that is just, I love you. This is great. This is awesome. That's a social knit. Everyone needs at least one person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at least one, because that keeps you going.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like 50 or 100 people that are like, I love you so much, you don't grow that way. I don't think you grow that way.
That's true.
That's my personal opinion. I think that you have to, iron has to sharpen iron.
Yeah.
And yes, Sam, I do have let me put my Discord in the chat. Iron sharpens iron. So, people argue with me, but I take it in stride. I take it as a compliment, because if they didn't see me as as someone worth arguing with, they wouldn't argue with me in the first place. So it's a compliment to me. Yeah, let me put it in the chat. But yeah, no, I think this is an interesting conversation. I hope I wasn't too aggressive. I wasn't trying to be aggressive or dismissive. I'm just today is like, I'm very tired and I want to eat. So it's nothing against you or anything. I hope I wasn't too mean or anything. I
No,
don't
you
like to
weren't.
be mean.
You
Okay,
should
good.
see my first debate with a trans activist, and he
Oh,
ended up
Jesus.
screaming at me.
Wow, he screamed at you.
Yes.
What did he say to you?
That I don't have the right to have female-only spaces because it's discriminatory.
Okay, now this is why I'm saying we need a revolution of the mind in America. That's a stupid argument. That's a stupid.
Right.
Of course, it's supposed to be discriminatory. You can't attach a moral value to discrimination, because discrimination is what we literally need to survive. If we didn't discriminate in life, we wouldn't survive. Society is based on discrimination. What we don't want is discrimination that happens that is enforced to the state or that is unjust. But that's crazy. So where can I find that debate at? By the way, if you guys want to go find my Discord, it's right there. So let me plug that debate. It's on your channel. I'll plug it right now.
Yeah, on my channel.
I'll plug it right now. Because that's crazy. No, so see, we probably agree on 98% of the issues, but probably not on this one, which is fine. But we probably agree on 98% of the issues. So, there we go. I found you. All right, guys. If you want to go check out her debate with this crazy trans person, go right there. Yeah, go right there. That's people are crazy, I swear. Trans activists.
And then he came back for part 2 and completely shut down over the most basic questions and refused to answer because he promised he wouldn't scream at me. And so then we just sat there in silence for like 45 seconds at a time because he refused to answer.
Yeah, that's not. So, there's something to be said about epistemic humility, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. That's why I'm comfortable saying to you, I haven't really thought much about minarchism versus anarchism, so I won't comment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comfortable saying that because guess what? I have humility. As a human being, I will never know everything. I will never win every fight. I don't even want to win every fight. I want to grow and advance in knowledge. So I'm comfortable enough with myself to say, hey, I have no problem, got no problem whatsoever admitting when I don't know something or haven't really given much thought to something. Having said that, um, yeah. So
All
hope
right.
you've enjoyed the debate.
I have. Thank you for talking to me. This was
No
great.
problem. We will do it again. I'm
Yes.
sure.
Next time you're wrong about something.
Oh yeah,
Just
I'll
kidding.
no,
Just
no,
kidding.
no, it's all right. Hold me accountable. All right, hold me accountable. All right, yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. And thank you.
Bye.
Bye.